Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about being prepared for an accident investigation. And I have someone very special here with me, Mr. Mark Dombroff. Mark was the very first person that we reached out to be on our advisory board, and we're thrilled to have him here today. Mark is a magician, an aviation lawyer, an author, and yes, I have his book. And I'm going to be getting an autograph at some point. He is also a subject matter expert on major news organization news desks. He is an advocate for aviation safety and emergency response. He is the founder of the Airline Symposium going into its 19th year. He is the founder of the Aviation Emergency Response Organization. He is a colleague, a friend, and he has a new role in being a grandfather. So congratulations on that role, Mark. And please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about what you do.
Well, thank you, Barb. I can't help but notice that your introduction was sort of classically lawyer-like. It was short, it was pithy, and it was grossly understated. I really don't think I would add anything to what you said.
Well, thank you. Yes, most people that will be watching this already know you very well. But for those who do not, Mark is an industry veteran, 40 years plus in the aviation legal sector. So we're thrilled to have you with us. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little about what makes accident investigation different in the United States versus internationally.
Well, I think when we look at the U.S. versus the rest of the world in the context of I'll broadly say transportation-related accidents, whether it's aviation, maritime, motor vehicle, pipeline for that matter, since interstate pipelines are considered to be a means of transportation, is the fact that in the United States, the investigating authority, and it's got parallels in every country throughout the world, but in the United States, it's the National Transportation Safety Board. And under the NTSB processes, they have what's called a party system. And the parties to the investigation are formally designated by the NTSB, and they are the entities, the operator, the manufacturer, so forth, that are in a position to make a technical contribution to the accident investigation. And there's a whole set of rules and procedures that surround party status, both entitlement to what's going on in the investigation, as well as limitations relative to what a party can say publicly that are unique in the context of the rest of the world. The U.S. is the only country that has a formal party system. When you look elsewhere in the world, whether it's in Canada, Europe, Africa, every country has its own system, and those systems provide for investigation typically by a government authority that may or may not be associated with some other element of government. The NTSB in the United States is independent of any other government agency. In other countries, they may be part of the transportation ministry or department. They may be part of the military, but there's no party system. So the entities that are involved, the operators, the manufacturers, municipalities, and so forth, have whatever role that accident investigation authority wants them to have, and has visibility into the investigation to the extent that the investigating authorities want them to have it. So the U.S. is somewhat, well, not somewhat, but is unique in the context of the party system.
So when you've, I guess, over the course of your career, I'm sure there have been some times when things have gone poorly in terms of an investigation. Can you talk about some of the pitfalls to avoid? I know that's been very helpful for our clients across the globe.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is for any operator, for any manufacturer, whatever, whether it's the aviation industry or any other industry, the rail industry, which obviously in the United States is making a lot of news now in terms of the derailment recently, or the aviation industry, which is making a lot of news now with respect to various issues, is to understand that the mentality of it's not going to be us, it's going to be them that has the event doesn't work. And the principal reason it doesn't work is that in terms of who has the event, everybody's pointing at everybody else. And, there are going to be events, whether they're things like derailments or near misses or severe turbulence or whatever the event is, there are going to be events. No matter how hard one works at safety programs and preventative type programs, there's still going to be events. So one, I think that mandates real preparation, not just check the box exercises. Once a year, you pull the emergency response handbook off the shelf or electronically bring it up on the screen and you run the exercise and put it back on the shelf for another year. Reality doesn't work that way, and you can't schedule emergencies. They occur when they want to occur and not when it's convenient to the organization. The other thing is the realization, and the analogy I've always used, Barb, and I know you've heard me talk about it, is when something happens, it's like a whole bunch of trains leaving the station all at once. And one of them is the accident investigation, whether it's in the U.S. or it's in another country. Another one is very likely some sort of criminal investigation, much more likely outside the United States than in the United States. Certainly in the world of aviation, there are many countries which criminalize aviation accidents. They either prosecute or sometimes actually arrest crew members who survive, air traffic controllers who are involved, and so forth. In the United States, we do not criminalize aviation accidents, but that's another train that may be leaving the station. One can always be assured that even in the United States, somewhere there's a prosecutor, a state or federal or local prosecutor who's looking for their 15 minutes of fame. But we don't have the tradition of prosecuting in the aviation world in the United States. Another train that leaves is the 24/7 news cycle these days. Another one is the employees, both the current employees and the former employees. And you can put the unions on that train, or you can put the unions on their own train if you choose. Then you have the shareholders, the financial markets, the owners. You have the customer base and the future customer base. And every one of these leaves at the same time as soon as the event occurs. Some of them run their course and end. Some of them keep going for a very long time. Many of the tracks cross. What happens over here may affect what happens over there. For example, in the United States, for virtually everything but the probable cause that is developed during an accident investigation is usable in the litigation. The NTSB briefs the media every night and is on television every night. And yet, if you are a party to the investigation, you are not permitted under NTSB rules, for example, you are not permitted to say anything after the accident that you couldn't have said before the accident. So all of these things unfold at the same time, and it's very critical for any company that could find themselves in the midst of an emergency response to understand everything that occurs all at once. And the companies that are least prepared to deal with this are the ones that are generally the safest, because they've never experienced it. They've never really lived it. And if you will, in the United States, for example, the safety record of the airline industry is pretty remarkable. There has not been a catastrophic accident There have been accidents. There has been a loss of life, but there has not been a catastrophic accident since 2009. That is a phenomenal safety record. It doesn't mean the industry can't be made safer. It doesn't mean that we can't have more procedures, better technology, but it's a phenomenal safety record. The downside of that is the fact that there are very few people left at airlines, for example, who have literally been there and done that, who have literally responded to a catastrophic event. And that the fact that their employer, the fact that the airline or the operator may have historically had an accident really doesn't transfer into institutional knowledge of the people that are still there. So I think in a sense it's a two-edged sword. Now, opting for which one is preferable, it's far preferable to continue that safety record for another 14 years at least. Than it is to give anybody hands-on experience with responding to, catastrophic type accidents. But it's really important for anybody that may find themselves, any company that may find themselves in this situation, that they should operate on the premise that it's not going to be them, the other company, but it's going to be us, and also understand the realities of what really happens after the event occurs, not just what the procedures say, not just what the checklist says, but how it really unfolds.
Absolutely. And as we noted in your conference that occurred just in February, the importance of including all of the stakeholders, because it's not enough for people to feel that their organization is prepared, because if you haven't included the other stakeholders in your training or in your response plan, it's a wild card as to what would happen in that situation.
It truly is. And one piece of advice that I've given all sorts of operators is if they have unions on the property, whether it's pilot unions, flight attendant unions, mechanic unions, whatever, they should reach out to those unions and establish relationships with the safety committees of the unions relative to emergency response, so that everybody's on the same page, recognizing that the unions are going to be there for their members, whether they're pilots or flight attendants, the families, so forth and so on. But there really should be a coordinated response, and it shouldn't be, every entity for itself. And so, I'm a huge believer in having, as you say, all the stakeholders around the table, whether it's the PR, public affairs folks, the financial folks, the insurance, risk management, the safety people, the C-suite people, the union folks, because an emergency response really has to be a coordinated effort.
And one of the other groups that I think are so important, and it's really how I met you, was by inviting the insurers to be in attendance, because they're the ones that will be paying a lot of the bill. So
critical role. They, I think one can say, well, they're there to write checks. And the fact is they are there to write checks. But one of the things that's very interesting, and we saw this at our recent aviation symposium just about 6 weeks ago, is that the real repository of historical experience and knowledge with respect to what really happens after an accident, an event, and that's subject to, a broad-ranging investigation, you have a huge amount of knowledge within the insurance companies and within the insurance brokers. They really, to the extent they move around, it's really, they go from this insurer to that insurer, from this broker to that broker, as opposed to leaving the industry altogether. Whereas I think that in the aviation industry itself, whether it's the operator, the manufacturers, and so forth, it's more of a structured departure. People don't make lots of changes over their career necessarily, unless their company, merges or gets acquired or so forth. But the insurers play an indispensable role by way of not only supporting their insureds, but bringing their institutional experience to the table as well.
Agreed. Can you talk a little about the importance of the crisis communications piece in connecting all of this together, and especially social media?
Yeah, obviously the last 10, 15 years, social media is on the scene, and it used to be the NTSB would find out about an accident from the 24/7 news stations that they have playing in their command center. The fact is that everybody knows about things that occur almost instantaneously, and everybody on every airplane is a reporter and is filming things, as we just saw with the disruptive passenger on board an aircraft here in the United States recently, where everybody filmed him and he was immediately on television and so forth. The rule in the U.S. and generally the rule in many countries, because they follow the U.S. rule generally, is that you can't say anything after an accident that you couldn't say before. So you can talk about your safety programs, your training programs, your quality control programs, the experience levels of your pilots, your employees, and so forth, the track record of the safety of the company, whether it's a product manufacturer or it's an operator. But you can't talk about the accident if you're going to be a party to the investigation. If there's bad information out there, if the media is promulgating bad information, if talking heads are giving bad information through the media who are not involved in the investigation, if the NTSB is misspeaking itself at the daily briefings, there are ways to get it corrected, and generally it's a function of going to the investigator in charge and explaining what the problems are. And my experience is more often than not, the NTSB will make the correction, whether it's their own error or the media is putting out less than accurate information. When a party to an investigation starts speaking to the media itself and starts issuing press releases, the consequences can essentially lead to being removed as a party to the investigation. And then you're on the outside as opposed to the inside. And my advice always is it's better to be on the inside than on the outside. For one thing, it eliminates saying no comment. You're able to say that as a party to the investigation, we're cooperating with the NTSB, and we are not allowed under their rules to comment on the investigation. So, and I think that's a good thing. So that's why I say the public affairs folks at the operator really need to know what the rules are, and the rules are workable. Outside the United States, in a sense, you're working by the rules of whatever country is in charge of the investigation. Some countries have rules, most do not vis-a-vis media, but one should be careful because outside the United States, the NTSB is always going to be a party to an investigation where the aircraft was certificated in the United States, manufactured in the United States, or it's a U.S. operator and so forth. All of this is under ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, Annex 13, which sets out the rules for accident investigations. Really, I'll say the broad rules, but what it means is that the state or country leading the investigation, it's their procedures which control. So outside the United States, it's not the NTSB rules. If the accident occurs in Canada, it would be the Canadian Transportation Safety Board. If it occurs in England and Great Britain, it would be the Air Accident Investigation Board's rules. So any operator who operates outside the United States really ought to familiarize itself with what it is subjecting itself to when it operates outside the United States, and not all of a sudden run around with their hair on fire when they have an emergency evac because of a collapsed nose gear at some other place that even though they have scheduled operations there, they never really looked at the rules, which is why I always tell operators, if you know where you're going to be operating, airlines, if you know where you're going to be operating, know what the rules are that you're subjecting yourself. So the first time you're looking at them is not after you've got notice of the event.
Excellent advice. One of the other areas that I think is of interest are those initial payments that are made, whether it's been an incident or a major accident. I know you had some successes in that. Could you speak to those payments?
Sure. And what you're referring to are the advance payments that are made to families or survivors immediately after the accident or the event. And basically, while in the United States, they are essentially required under legislation, they really came about not legislatively. They came about because one of the insurers decided it made sense. They were right. And so what you have is, our advice is usually to get an advance payment, a check, in the hands of the family or the passenger within, we say, 72 hours following the event itself. The check should be drawn on, in the case of airlines, airline check stock. The cover letter should be from the president, the CEO, the senior vice president, top level at the airline. It should convey the regrets of the airline for the event having occurred. It's not an admission of liability. It should indicate that the check is to cover short-term needs, like tuition payments, property tax payments, short-term needs. The amount is not specified. I think customarily, just by custom and practice, in the case of a death where a passenger is killed, the checks are usually $25,000 US. In the case of an airline, about 90% of the recipients of the checks are readily identifiable: husbands, wives, parents, so forth. There's always going to be some percentage where it's not clear. And at that point, it's really a function of sucking it up and hoping that you've identified the right people. We've assisted with that any number of times in terms of helping to identify the right people that would be involved. Some of it is by reference to state law as to who has the legal right, who's the legal representative, and so forth. There's still going to be a percentage where you're just not able to. But again, you suck it up and issue a check, and then you may issue another one later. The money comes from the insurance company. They'll make the money available, in our experience, to its insured. The question, in my experience, more often than not, that comes up is, should they sign anything? Should the family or the passenger sign anything? Is it creditable against a final resolution? Our advice is should not be conditioned on a final resolution. In other words, a credit. There should be no requirement that they sign anything. This should be a goodwill gesture of the airline, who had a contract with the passenger to deliver them from point A to point B without incident. I think most insurers agree with that. There is some question among folks out there on occasion in specific incidents as to whether there should be a release signed, an acknowledgement signed. Should it be credited against a final resolution, final settlement? I think that doing those things tends to cause families to say, well, maybe I better have a lawyer look at this. Not to say that they won't look at it anyway, but this should be an advance payment because the airline basically didn't do, in the case of the airline, what it was supposed to do: deliver the passenger from point A to point B without an unscheduled stop in the middle, so to speak. Probably the greatest success story, and I'm not going to say it was attributable solely to the advance payments, but I think in large measure it was attributable to how quickly the insurer and the airline got on board and moved, was the U.S. Airways Flight 1549, and generally colloquially known as the Miracle on the Hudson. Payments were made to every passenger on board that airplane. There were, the overwhelming majority of them were all the same. Towards the end, that there was some additional amounts that had to be paid, and there may always be some additional amounts that have to be paid. Something unforeseen may have presented itself by virtue of an individual passenger, but there was not a single lawsuit filed following that accident. And I think in part it was attributable to the fact that the passengers appreciated how quickly U.S. Airways reacted to this. The money came from the insurer, but the letters, which we looked at and in fact assisted in drafting the letters, because the language is very important so that the payment is not perceived by the federal government as taxable. But everything moved quickly. And as a result, I think at least one source of anger in terms of how they were being treated was eliminated. So again, advance payments are very important. On the Colgan accident, the one in 2009, the last catastrophic accident, I think checks were either wholly delivered or almost wholly delivered within 72 hours of the event having occurred. So it's very significant, and it's something that an operator can make plans for well in advance in terms of having the letters where essentially one has to just fill in the blanks.
And can you talk a little about the importance of family assistance from a legal perspective? Because last month we devoted our podcast to different members of our team that handle family assistance. But from a legal perspective and standpoint, can you speak a little about that?
Yeah, I think the best object lesson I can provide with respect to the family assistance is that every airline that operates into the United States, both U.S. airlines, obviously controlled by the Department of Transportation and the FAA, as well as foreign airlines who operate into the United States, have to give certain assurances to the Department of Transportation regarding family assistance programs. But the only thing is that it's an assurance. The assurance is we have this program, and it addresses, I think it's 18 areas. The Department of Transportation doesn't pass on the effectiveness of the actual program itself. They trust these responsible corporations, responsible operators to have what they say they have. A number of years ago, Asiana Airlines had an accident in San Francisco. And the net result of that was that the Department of Transportation concluded that they did not live up to the obligations that they had assured the Department of Transportation they were going to live up to in these assurances. And the Department of Transportation issued a relatively scathing opinion, finding that they had failed to discharge their obligations, in that case under the Foreign Family Assistance Act, and they penalized them, I believe it was $500,000 in civil penalties for failing to live up. People were not on scene fast enough. Family assistance was not rendered quickly enough. And but for the code share partner, and I think it was United Airlines was the Asiana code share partner, which did have people on the ground in San Francisco, the situation could have been much worse. I think United Airlines sort of stepped in as a code share partner and discharged many responsibilities, but the obligations belong to the operator. And so I think on every event that is covered by the family assistance legislation, whether it's domestic family assistance or it's the foreign family assistance legislation, these are legal obligations. This is not some, pie in the sky type thing that just is sort of recommended. Operators really have to understand they've got to step up. And these emergency response drills shouldn't just be the emergency response of the GO team, the accident investigation folks. It should be full flexing of the emergency response apparatus, and that includes the family assistance team, whether it's GoCrisis as a third-party provider or whomever, outside public relations type people. Everybody's got to understand that the goal here is the same. That goal at the end of the day is to protect the brand. And I've never experienced, and I think back, anybody referring to an accident as an XYZ insurance company accident or an XYZ third-party provider accident. It's always the operator. It's always the airline. And so it's that brand which is so important to protect. And family assistance is a critical part. My experience is that if people get angry in the first 24, 48, 72 hours after the accident, the family members, the survivors, that anger, it's really, really hard to dissipate that anger and turn it around. Really hard, if not impossible.
Absolutely. Well, in our last few seconds of our podcast, could you share what I guess would be your best advice to the people that are doing emergency response and safety, especially the new people to our industry?
Yeah. I love to be able to say, talk to people within your company that have been there and done that. Sit down with them for an hour, 2 hours, go to lunch, have coffee with them, talk to them about what it's really like, what really happens. That's what we try to do at our annual symposium, because what really happens is awfully different than what the book says. All the real pressures are there. So my advice would be to reach out, and probably one of the best ways to do it is through AERO. Come full circle, you mentioned AERO, the Aviation Emergency Response Organization, because there are lots of people who are members of AERO who have really been there and done that. And one thing I have seen throughout my entire career is that when an accident occurs, when an emergency presents itself, operators, airlines are no longer competitors. They are there to help one another. And whether it's your code share partner, whether it's just another operator in that city where the event occurred and you don't have people on the ground, it doesn't matter. The entire industry comes together, and an awfully good focal point is AERO, which is really a resource. So I would strongly endorse anybody that's involved directly or indirectly in emergency response. One, recognize the realities can't really be described fully in your checklists. And two, recognize that, there are people there, and more often than not, they may be outside your company, who are more than happy to share their experience with you and answer your questions. So the advice I would leave everybody is reach out and take advantage of the resources that are there.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for this valuable session today. I know people will really enjoy it. If any of you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@gocrisis.com, or you can contact Mark at Fox Rothschild. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Barb.